Prince Ashot, the first Bagrationi, was born sometime in the later half of the 8th century. His legacy is over a millennium old, as his direct descendants are still considered nobility to this very day. For Iberia, he marked the return of the princes and a new chapter in Georgian history. This is the story of a monarch who truly deserves the title of the Great. Prince Ashot Bagrationi was born in the Duchy of Tau Clergeti. We aren't sure about his exact birth date or even what year he was born in, but one can assume that he was born between the years of 750 and 770 AD. His father was a man named Adarnase, and he was the Duke of Tau Clergeti. The first pivotal moment in Ashot's life came in 786. In this year, the Abbasid Caliphate, under Caliph Harun al-Rashid, sends a massive army north, hoping to finally annex the lands of Georgia. For nearly the past 100 years, the princes of Iberia were vassals of the Abbasid Caliphate. However, for the past 20, leading up to 786, the Abbasids began showing more and more interest in owning Iberia directly. The current prince of Iberia was a young man named Stephen III. He appeared to not put up much of a fight, as the Abbasids steamrolled Armenia and took the majority of central and eastern Georgia. They also took with them the heads of at least 2 Georgian princes, one being Stephen III and the other being the Prince of Kartli, Archil Chosroid. With their father put to death and their lands sufficiently conquered, the 2 children of Archil fled to the protection of Tau Clergeti, who themselves were under the protection of the Eastern Roman Byzantine Empire. These 2 deposed princes were named John and Jean Shir, and following them was a wave of Georgian refugees. The elder of the 2 brothers, Jean Shir, is married to the daughter of Duke Adarnase. He is also named as Prince of Iberia, which, during his life, was only in de jure, an empty title that no longer commanded the respect it once had. The younger brother, John, dies in 790 without an heir. The older brother, Jean Shir, goes on to do the same in 807. Their possessions and land claims are then passed on to Duke Adarnase, who would then pass them on to his only son, Ashot. In 809, the expansionist Abbasid Caliphate finds itself divided between 2 sons of Caliph Harun al-Rashid. A civil war ensued, and many governors inside the Abbasid Empire took the opportunity to create their own caliphate or emirate. The most crucial of these new Arab states for our story is the Emirate of Tbilisi. After the 786 Abbasid invasion, a man named Ismail ibn Shab is installed as the governor of Iberia from his seat in the modern-day capital of Georgia, Tbilisi. When the 809 Abbasid succession crisis broke out, he was one of the first to break away from the caliphate. He was assisted by a local Georgian strongman named Grigol. After the 786 invasion, and with the absence of the executed Prince Stephen III, a power vacuum was created in Kakheti, eastern Georgia. It was filled by Grigol, who named himself Prince and Bishop over Kakheti. There was no way to tell if collusion between Grigol of Kakheti and Ismail ibn Shab occurred before 809, but one can assume, simply based on the fact that Grigol did not lose his head, that there was some kind of informal partnership between these 2 men. And if there wasn't then there was certainly an alliance formed after Ismail ibn Shab declared his independence in 809. However, the Emirate of Tbilisi would be short-lived. Later in 809, a recently crowned Abbasid Caliph named Al-Amin marched north to Tbilisi. The outnumbered Ismail ibn Shab had little choice but to surrender. This he did with little to no fight. He was then reinstalled as governor over Iberia, before Caliph Al-Amin returned south to confront his soon-to-be rebellious brother named Al-Mamun. Meanwhile, in the Duchy of Tau Clergeti, the downtrodden Georgians began to rally around the preachings of an abbot named Gregory. From his monastery at Konsta, Gregory started gathering a noticeable following. His preachings, although religious in nature, would often end with a call to action against the Arab invaders who had taken central and eastern Georgia. In 811, Duke Adarnase of Tau Clergeti would die, leaving all of his inheritance to his only son, Ashot. While Duke Adarnase remained somewhat stagnant during his reign, the same cannot be said of his son. Almost immediately, Ashot begins the symbolic repair of Artunaji Fortress. Located in Clergeti, this castle was built by the Wolf King himself, the Haktung Gorgasali. One of the most remembered kings of Iberia, Bahaktung Gurgasali was so influential that his name was eventually immortalized, as it is he that the modern-day country of Georgia is named after. This repair would connect Ashote to the Great King. Continuing to follow in his footsteps, Ashote begins to look for allies. And just like Bahaktung, Ashote looked toward the Byzantine Empire. Later in 811, Ashote Bagrationi would be named as a Kouropalate. This title was one given out by the emperors of Eastern Rome, and was one of the most honorific titles you could earn in the empire. The title translates to in charge of the palace, but eventually evolved to symbolize something of a personal sponsorship from the emperor. The first Georgian to hold such a rank was Prince Guram I, the first presiding prince of Iberia. Many of the following vassal princes held the same title, with Prince Nurse becoming the last to do so. Ashote wore the title of Kouropalates very proudly. After all, it commanded more respect than being a duke. Typically, Duke Ashote could be found wearing the red tunic and belt that symbolized his Kouropalate status. His western flank was now all but secured by the protection of his title. His neighbor to the north, King Leon II of Abkhazia, was also pacified, this time by marriage. The eldest son of King Leon II, a man named Theodosius II, was married to the daughter of Ashote Bagrationi. This made Ashote the father-in-law of the future king of Abkhazia. Now with his northern border secured, the Duke had only to worry about the Abbasid Caliphate to his south and east, but not for long. The Caliphal brothers, Al-Mamun and Al-Amin, had continued their civil war. After 4 years in 813, the brother to come out on top was Al-Mamun. He had his younger brother executed, and became the sole Abbasid Caliph. However, the civil war continued in a few places, namely in Iraq, Arabia, and Tbilisi. After his first failed revolt that was stamped out by Caliph Al-Amin, Ismail ibn Shab agreed to become a loyal governor once again. However, no agreement was made between the governor and Al-Mamun. Shortly after Al-Amin's execution in 813, Ismail ibn Shab again declared his independence, becoming Emir of Tbilisi. Like last time, he was not alone, but assisted by Grigul of Kakheti. Caliph Al-Mamun had no time to venture to the peripheries of his control. He was dealing with rebellions more central to his empire. So instead of personally dealing with Ismail ibn Shab and his Kakhetian collaborator, Al-Mamun does something wholly unexpected. In 813, Caliph Al-Mamun names Ashote Bagrationi as the Prince of Iberia, giving him the go-ahead to subjugate the Emirate of Tbilisi. The title of prince had been an absent one since the death of Ashote's brother-in-law, Janshir Chosroid, in 807. Now after 6 years, and 17 years since the execution of the last Iberian prince to hold any real power, Stephen III, the title was resurrected by the very same entity that had destroyed it. Make no mistake, Iberia was still a vassal of the Eastern Roman Empire, but was left in something of a mercenary limbo state with Al-Mamun's proposal to Ashote. Now with his west, north, and south all secured, and his sponsorship from the two biggest regional powers, Ashote had only to look east, towards the city of Tbilisi. The Kouropalate Prince of Iberia began assembling an army, employing the assistance of the influential abbot, Gregory of Consta. In recent years, Gregory's sermons continued attracting large crowds, as he was quickly becoming the face of Georgia's Orthodox Church. With permission granted and preparations concluded, Prince Ashote began his eastward march. Through a series of swift occupations, he brought much of South Georgia under his domain, at the expense of the Tbilisi Emirate. Sometime during these initial gains, the Emir, Ismail ibn Shab, would meet the recently crowned prince. In the ensuing battle, the Emir would be killed, and nearly all of his emirate would fall into Ashote's hands, with the exception of Tbilisi itself. A new Emir would be found, in the form of a man named Muhammad ibn Attab, who would continue in the futile defense of the little land he still controlled. Emir Muhammad would eventually be forced into guerrilla warfare, going on the defensive to try to stem the flow of Ashote. This kind of slow-paced grogging warfare would continue for the next 13 years. In 826, the Emir decided that the time to fight back had come. With help from the allied Prince Bishop of Kakheti, Grigori, a counteroffensive into central Georgia was launched. Together, they pushed Ashot's forces past the Kasani River. However, this otherwise successful offensive was forced to a sudden stop after a year. In 827, Grigory of Kakheti, longtime rival of Ashot and ally to the emirate, dies of natural causes. He would be succeeded by another prominent Kakhetian named Vache Kavabaludzi. The death of Grigory, although important for stalling this campaign, is overshadowed by the death of another ruler in the region, King Leon II of Abkhazia. Leon II, Abkhazia's first independent king, was the leading neutral power in the Caucasus Mountain region. His diplomatic mind always chose peace rather than war. His death in 828 would see the sleeping giant awaken under his son, the now King Theodosius II, otherwise known as the son-in-law of Ashot Bagrationi. Unlike his father, Theodosius did not stand idly by while Ashot was being pushed back. Instead, he brought an army to the Iberian prince. With their forces combined, they pushed the army of Vache and Emir Muhammad back to the Kasani River. The armies met in full force on the western bank of the Kasani. The four commanders fought a ferocious battle until the Kakhetians and Arabs broke and attempted to flee across the river. Many drowned in their flight as Ashot and the Abkhazians pushed forward, reoccupying the lands that he held at the beginning of this long war. In that same year of 828, after the emir and prince bishop were forced back to their respective territories, a new Abbasid governor of Armenia was installed. His name was Khalid ibn Yazid. He had briefly been governor of Armenia in 813, possibly to lend assistance to Ashot, but in 814, he was removed from the position, as his expertise were needed elsewhere in the empire. Caliph al-Mamun had installed Khalid to personally deal with the Tbilisi Emirate. Al-Mamun had given Ashot a chance to reconquer the city, but he was simply just taking too long for the Caliph. In under a year, the Armenian governor deposes Emir Muhammad, but instead of abolishing the emirate, he appoints the brother of Ismail ibn Shab as the new, loyal emir. His name was Ali ibn Shab, and with his assistance from Governor Khalid, he begins a new campaign against Ashot and Theodosius. Like before, the forces of Ashot are pushed back, this time much farther. The Arab forces managed to take back all of what Ashot occupied in that previous year, and even more. They would invade Klarjeti itself, with Ashot continuing to fall back deeper into his duchy. One day, in the midst of this retreat, Ashot prayed for his deliverance at a local church. His prayers would be answered, but not in the way he'd hoped for. Ashot never saw the assassins coming. He would be killed on January 29th of 830 by assassins under the employment of Governor Khalid ibn Yazid. His bloodied body would be found moments later on the altar of the church. He would be succeeded as Prince of Iberia by his son, Bagrat. Ashot Bagrationi the Great of Iberia is responsible for the resurgence of Iberia after the 786 Arab invasion that was almost a complete domination. From his home base in Klarjeti, he managed to align himself with Eastern Rome, Abkhazia, and even the Abbasid Empire for a time. Eventually, he would be betrayed after fighting the Emirate of Tbilisi on behalf of the Abbasid Caliphate. His reign is most important, as he marks the first of many, and I mean many, rulers of Georgia that hailed from the Bagrationi family. If you watched my video on the origins of the Bagrationi family, then you would already know that this is the first of many, and I mean many videos that I am making on the whole of the Bagrationi dynasty that ruled in one part or another of Georgia for nearly 1,000 years. If you'd like to support this series, feel free to do so on my Patreon and become a member for as little as $1 a month. In 830 AD, the first Bagrationi prince of the resurgent princedom of Caucasus Iberia, Ashot the Great, laid dead on the altar of a church after his assassination at the hands of the Abbasid Caliphate. The princedom of Iberia was now in dire need of a ruler who could wield the same authority as their great king. This they found in his young son, Bagrat. Bagrat Bagrationi was likely born sometime around the year of 810 AD. His mother's name is unknown and has been lost to the midst of time. He was the middle child of two brothers, the eldest being named Attribution and the younger being named Guram. Bagrat also had one younger sister, whose name has also been lost to time. We, however, do know that she married the future king of neighboring Abkhazia, Theodosius II. Shortly after his birth, Bagrat would be baptized by the influential abbot, Gregory of Consta. Gregory had been the voice of the Georgian Orthodox Church in the preceding decades, his sermons attracting massive crowds, as he served as the religious bedrock of the revived princedom. Sometime in Bagrat's youth, the marriage was arranged for him with the Princess of Armenia, and likely his cousin. While her name has been lost to time, we do know that her father was Prince Sumbat VIII Bagrationi, also known as Sumbat the Confessor, therefore connecting the two Bagratid dynasties as one. Bagrat's youthful years came to an abrupt halt in 830 AD, when his father, who was in the midst of a long and drawn-out campaign, was assassinated while praying at an Iberian church. His three sons now needed to divide not only their father's land amongst themselves, but also his assortment of royal titles. The eldest son, Attribution, received the realm at the center of Iberia. The youngest son, Guram, received the easternmost territory, sharing a border with his father's archenemies, the Emirate of Tbilisi, and their Georgian ally, Kakheti. Bagrat received the western portion, strung out along the Black Sea and sharing a border with the Eastern Roman Empire. To avoid inheritance disputes among the siblings, the three of them chose to pass the Shotes titles of Prince of Iberia and Koropolates, or vassal, of the Eastern Roman Empire, over to their middle brother, Bagrat. He would now act as the face of Iberia. For 12 years after the death of their father, the three brothers ruled in their respective portions of Iberia in a peaceful manner, the two other brothers acquiring strategic marriages of their own during this period. Attribution married a princess of Abkhazia, and Guram married another daughter of Sumbat the Confessor, as his brother Bagrat had. In 842, Iberia's peace was disrupted. The Abbasid Caliphate had returned, but not to finish their work in destroying Iberia. Instead, they were here for an alliance. Just as they had during Ashot's lifetime, the Abbasid Caliph sought an alliance with Iberia to destroy their mutual foe, the Emirate of Tbilisi, who had broken away from Abbasid rule in 810. Mimicking the deal given to his father, Bagrat would be recognized as Prince of Iberia, and promised the lands of Kartli for his military aid. Bagrat agreed, and mobilized for a combined march on Tbilisi. The Abbasid governor of Armenia leading this expedition was Muhammad ibn Khalid, also known as the son of the previous Armenian governor who had ordered for the assassination of Ashot. Despite this, it appears that no serious grudges were held, as both men looked to expand their influence over the Caucasus Mountain region. The Georgian and Arab armies reached the outer walls of Tbilisi. Here, they put the city to the siege. The emir of Tbilisi, named Sahak, defended his walls with zeal, along with his Kakhetian ally. The old walls of the city did not wane, and were eventually left undisturbed by the Iberian Abbasid army, who decided to withdraw. While the campaign had failed, Bagrat still managed to come to friendly terms with what was his biggest threat, the Abbasid Caliphate. They now recognized his title of Prince of Iberia. All this while Bagrat was a vassal of the Abbasid's biggest rival, the Eastern Roman Empire. Bagrat, as seemed to be a theme in Iberia, was now playing the two biggest empires in the region off of one another for his own gain. Sometime between 842 and 853, the Princedom of Iberia added a sizable chunk of Armenia to their holdings, more specifically to the holdings of Bagrat's younger brother, Guram. The dynasty of Armenian princes from the region known as Gugark had went extinct. Instead of dissolving into the Abbasid Empire or another Armenian noble family, Guram became the successor to the Gugark dynasty, probably citing some form of far-off relation to these Armenian princes. With that, much of the borderland between Iberia and the Emirate of Tbilisi fell under the domain of Guram, and by extension, the Princedom of Iberia. For over a decade after the failed 842 siege of Tbilisi, Iberia once more found itself in a state of peace. This would come to be disrupted in the exact same way. The Abbasids called upon Bagrat in 853, their intention being the destruction of the Tbilisi Emirate. This time, the Abbasid army would be led by a much more battle-proven commander, a man by the name of Buga the Turk. Buga was a man of Khazar descent, who had come to the Abbasid Caliphate as a slave soldier. He quickly rose through the ranks and out of his servitude to become a trusted and battle-hardened commander of the Caliph. Both Garam and Bagrat met Buga the Turk on their way to subdue Tbilisi. This time, Amir Sahak wouldn't get so lucky. Held up in the city itself, he probably expected this campaign to conclude as it had before, a withdrawal of the attacking force under the impenetrable walls of Tbilisi. Quite the opposite would occur. Somehow, the walls were breached, as the Iberians and Abbasids stormed the city. Amir Sahak was captured and executed by Buga the Turk, who decided to put an end to this pesky rebel state once and for all. Buga proceeded in burning Tbilisi to the ground, taking any valuables with him and forcing the people into slavery or migration. The campaign continued north, capturing the region of Kartli and, as promised, handing it over to Bagrat. With the Tbilisi Emirate now destroyed and Kartli in the hands of Iberia, the Abbasid Caliphate formally recognized Bagrat as the prince of both Iberia and Kartli. Through inheritance and conquest, Iberia had nearly doubled in size during the reign of Bagrat. However, this recent victory would be short-lived. Just a year after the burning of Tbilisi and the occupation of Kartli, an unexpected enemy attacked Iberia, their longtime ally, the Kingdom of Abkhazia. The betrayal was due to the crowning of a new king in Abkhazia, George. George was the brother of the two previous kings of Abkhazia, both of which had marital ties to Iberia. George, on the other hand, had no such ties, and immediately broke the alliance after assuming the throne. He invaded Kartli and took the recently war-devastated region with ease. With Bagrat's loss of Kartli, he would spend the next decade trying to regain Kartli, to no avail. In the last 12 years of Bagrat's reign, he gave back to his country by funding the building of many of Georgia's finest churches, including the monastery of Kansta and Ishkahani, the first of which would be the seat of the abbot who had baptized him, Gregory of Kansta. Abbot Gregory managed to reach the age of 100 in the year 859 nonetheless, before passing away at the ripe and old age of 102. He was immediately canonized by the Georgian Orthodox Church as their first and only centenarian saint. In 876, Bagrat joined Gregory in the grave, dying of old age after ruling Iberia for a long stint of 47 years. Prince Bagrat of Iberia started his reign in uncertain circumstances, with the assassination of his father and two other brothers that could have taken the throne during this chaos. However, all three brothers banded together and avoided any and all conflict with one another over the succession, his eldest brother Adarnase even conceding the princely rank to Bagrat. Whilst he lost Kartli in the end, Bagrat did manage to bring about the utter destruction of Tbilisi, which ironically is the present-day capital of Georgia. Prince David Bagrationi of Iberia was likely born sometime around 850. He was the son of the ruling prince of Iberia, Bagrat, and his wife, a princess of the Armenian Bagratid royal house. His life was the very embodiment of what it meant to be a Bagratid, as his birth combined the two separate portions of these families. A few days after his birth, he would be baptized by the same man who had baptized his father, an 80-year-old abbot and future saint named Gregory of Kansta. There is nearly nothing written about the early life of David, but we can make just a few assumptions about it. As the oldest of three sons, he was probably groomed from a young age to succeed his father as the presiding prince of Iberia. We do know that the middle of these three brothers died in his formative years, and this probably dampened what was likely an otherwise normal, royal upbringing. Because of the age of his son, which we can only assume, we can say that David likely married around the age of 20, but perhaps even younger. A recurring statement here is that we don't know who his wife was, but once again we can assume that she was either another Armenian Bagratid or a princess perhaps from neighboring Abkhazia. David would have a total of 2 children with her, a daughter whose name has not been recorded, and a son who would take a family name, Adarnase. At around the age of 25, David would become the new Prince of Iberia after the death of his father in 876. From this, the Byzantine Empire, who treated Iberia like it was somewhere between a vassal and a buffer state, confirmed the ever-important title of Kouropalates onto David. Even though the Byzantine Empire confirmed the title of Kouropalates, David would still have to navigate the complicated political situation that domineered over the entirety of the princedom of Iberia. That complicated situation was being smack down in the middle of the Byzantine Empire and whatever empire controlled Mesopotamia and Iran. Currently, it was the Abbasid Caliphate. And to this caliphate, Prince David would pay a yearly tribute to avoid any conflict. Both of these empires wanted Iberia. While one bribed Iberia with titles, Iberia would bribe the other with gold. Shortly after his ascension as prince, David would form a very important alliance. This would be with his first cousin, the rising Prince of Princes of Armenia, Ashot the Great Bagrationi. Ashot of Armenia was made famous on the battlefield after he defeated the Abbasid Caliphate despite being outnumbered by 40,000. This would allow Armenia to start their breakaway from the Caliphate, ushering in an age of increasing autonomy. This would be highly favorable for Iberia, as they now had some breathing room away from the Abbasids and a powerful royal cousin on their doorstep. While both David and Ashot probably wanted a close alliance with each other, they also had their own ambitions in mind. They both had a familial rival in the form of David's uncle, Guram. Guram was the Duke of the Eastern Territories of Iberia and had inherited a portion of Armenia in the 840s. Ashot wanted that inherited portion of Armenia, while David sought to split his remaining land with an Iberian nobleman to curb his growing influence. It's unclear if there was a military confrontation, or just the threat of one, but Guram eventually does concede his lands in Armenia as well as the northern half of his dukedom. With Guram's land seized, Iberia returned to a state of peace. Prince David and Ashot were more than happy with this arrangement, but not everybody was. Guram had no intentions of rebelling despite his obvious mistreatment. However, his son Nasra was extremely angered with this new arrangement, as he would one day inherit the little land that his father still held. This anger continued to fester in Nasra for the next 5 years, before he decided to act on it. In 881, he would murder his cousin, Prince David of Iberia, in cold blood. After this, Nasra ran to the protection of Iberia's northern rival, the Kingdom of Abkhazia. From here, he would begin to gather an army in hopes of reclaiming his inheritance and taking the crown of Iberia for himself. Despite the murder, David's young son, Adarnase, would inherit the princely title and become Prince Adarnase IV of Iberia. While he became the prince, the Byzantine Empire refused to endow him with the title of Kouropalates due to his young age. Instead, they handed the title to his older cousin, Gurgen, who in turn declared independence from Iberia and became the Prince of Tau. David of Iberia, while his reign was a short 5 years, contributed something that would become very important, an alliance with Ashot of Armenia. While this alliance and subsequent land grab from his uncle would prove to be its own downfall, he did manage to keep the Bagrationi wolves at bay. That is, until a lone wolf from this family would release the others from their cage. And with the death of Prince David, Iberia would be plunged into a decade of chaotic, dynastic warfare.